Okay, yeah, thanks, Eric. Appreciate, you and Kurt inviting me to share just some of this, and just to echo kind of what you were saying. It comes down to the word. I think that's what our Messiah did. Was he looked at the scriptures, he looked at the word, he looked up at the heavens, and he said, "That's me. That's who it's speaking about." And that's what we can do too as believers, is claim those promises in Yah's word and say he is going to protect us, he's going to take care of us, because that's his promise. And he never lets his word turn void. He never lets his word fall to the ground. And so we have confidence in the scriptures, confidence in the word, confidence in his promises. Made me think of, in Ephesians, I'll just read this verse here in Ephesians. It says, "Blessed be the Elohim of and Father of Yahushua Mashiach, who has blessed us with all spiritual blessings in the heavens, in the heavenly places, in the Messiah, according as he has chosen us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love." So this was something he had in the plan from the very beginning, that we were going to be holy and without blame before him, having predestinated us, or predetermined, to let us unto the adoption of children by the Messiah to himself, according to the good will of his pleasure, to the praise and glory of his grace, wherein he has made us the accepted in the beloved, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, according to the riches of his grace, wherein he hath abounded us in all wisdom and prudence, having made known unto us the mystery of his will, according to good pleasure, which he purposed in himself. So he's made that mystery known to us. And it says that in the dispensation, or the administration of the fullness of times, he might gather together one in all things in Mashiach, both which are in heaven and which are on the earth. So this is us, we're gathering together, right? We're going to meet Yahusha in the air, and we're going to sit there and try to separate these stars, try to understand what the Father has predetermined from the before the foundation of the world. It says that we have obtained an inheritance, being predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will, that we should be to the praise and glory who first trusted in the Messiah, in whom ye have also trusted after you heard the word, the debar of truth, the gospel of your salvation, in whom after you believed, you were sealed with that Holy Spirit of promise. And so I think that that's what we're doing. It's the fullness of times. We've come to this very point in time that we've been able to weave our way through all the doctrines, through all the teachings, through all the men and women who have come before us, to be able to understand these things. And we're talking about the Shamayim, right? So I see that as Shamar, let's listen, let's hear, let's obey, and the Mayim is the waters above. So what is written? What did Abraham write, or what did he sefer out in the stars? And that's kind of what we're doing here, looking at this today. And we spoke about this last week about the wedding rehearsal. So I made that proposition that, well, it's telling the overall encompassing story of a wedding story. And when we understand from the Hebrew perspective, from a wedding, what happens during a wedding is there's an engagement. And so what this Shamayim, what's in the heavens, what's written in Genesis, it talks about the seasons, the Moedim, and the signs, which is an oath. And so whenever we make an oath, it's the marriage covenant. And so we're looking into this marriage covenant, this story that is told throughout all of mankind, that's innate in all cultures, pervasive in all these different cultures. And so they've all had their own version, their own stories, but that story is actually told up in the heavens. And that's the story that we see ending in Revelation, to sitting down with the Lamb at the wedding feast. And the Messiah talked about when he came, his ministry opens up going to a wedding. And there's many parables throughout the scriptures that talks about the wedding. And he's saying, he looked into the scriptures, he looked into the heavens, and he says, I am fulfilling this role. So he didn't only fulfill the law and the prophets, but he fulfilled the role of the scriptures that's written in the stars above. And I want to just read one more time. I'm going to read from actually a Septuagint Britain version of Psalms 19, and it says, verse 1, for the end of a psalm of David, the heavens, the heavenly scroll, it declares the glory of Elohim, and the firmament proclaims the work of his hands. Day to day utters speech, and night to night proclaims knowledge. There are no speeches or words in which their voices are not heard. Their voice is gone out into all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. In the sun he has set his tabernacle, and he comes forth as a bridegroom out of his chamber. He will exalt as a giant to run his course. Verse 6, his going forth is from the extremity of heaven, and his circuit, his tekufa, to the other end of heaven, and no one shall be hidden from his heat. The law of Yahuwah is perfect, converting souls. The testimony of Yahuwah is faithful, instructing babes. The ordinances of Yahuwah are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of Yahuwah is bright, enlightening the eyes. So we see here that King David's talking about, this portrayal of a bridegroom coming out of his chambers. Each one of these chambers, and we see that communication that when Messiah, we see the correlation between these festivals, the Moedim. So we have the spring feast when the husband and the fiance they get engaged, and so they have the engagement rehearsals. And so during this time of period, this is when, from a Hebrew perspective, when the dowry is offered to the father. And so in the gospel records we read where that the Messiah said, I have given my life as a ransom for many. And so he is giving himself as a ransom for his bride. All right. And so that is the festival that we understand to be in Aries. When the sun is in Aries, that's when we have the beginning of the year, and we have the Pesach, the Passover meal. I want to read real quick too. This is another version of regarding Passover, Aries, in Jeremiah 31 verses 7 and 8. First, I'm going to read in the Sefer version, and then I'm going to read in the Septuagint version. In Jeremiah 31 verse 7, it says, for thus says Yahuwah, sing with gladness, O Jacob, and shout among the chief of the nations. Publish ye, praise ye, and say, O Yahuwah, save your people, the remnant of Yisrael. Behold, I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the coast of the earth, and with them the blind and the lame, the woman and the child, and her that travails with child together, a great company shall return. Now I want to read this in the Septuagint. It's just a little bit different. I think it's interesting just in relation of bringing the remnant of Yisrael together. So we are coming together. This is the gathering together, understanding, what these Moedim mean and what it means for this season. And so in the Septuagint, for thus says Yahuwah to Jacob, rejoice ye and exult over the head of the nations. Make proclamation and praise ye. Say Yahuwah has delivered his people, the remnant of Israel. Behold, I bring them from the north and will gather them from the end of the earth to the feast of the Passover. So that's completely different what we read from our Masorite friends. So it says, the end of the earth to the feast of the Passover, and the people shall beget a great multitude, and they shall return hither. And so the Passover, the Pesach, right? That's the time that the sun is located in Aries. And we understand from that story, that's the beginning meal. So we're having the meal together. We're in rehearsal with getting prepared for that wedding feast. And so we have two comings of the Messiah. We have the suffering servant. The Messiah comes during the spring feast for his first time. And then we also have the conquering king that when he comes for the fall feast. And so within Scripture, and I think this is important for a lot of people to understand, is, there's metaphors throughout Scriptures. You can have layers of metaphors that are on top of each other, and they don't contradict, but they tell a different side of the story. Like the Messiah can be a lamb, but also he can be a lion, right? These are metaphors. He's the priest, but yet he's the lamb. So is he, so we have to think about these from, is he the scapegoat, the lamb that goes out and carries the sins that's made for Azazel, or is he the one that was sacrificed for our sins? So there's different metaphors within the Scriptures, and I think that's important to have that understanding. And so understanding that the Messiah is the one who is written about in the stars, and he's telling this wedding story throughout history. We're focusing on the Pesach meal and that gathering together. And so the overall encompassing story of mankind is told from this perspective. And so during Pesach, they have the rehearsals, they're getting ready, preparing, they're having the feast. And then we move into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And, what the parallels that we glean from these festivals and events is, as, we cleanse ourselves from bad doctrines, we cleanse ourselves from sin, we take away this purity, or take away, these things of the world, and we try to cleanse ourselves. We try to lose weight. We try to prepare ourselves as we're getting ready to get married and to the kingdom. And so we are becoming sons-in-laws, daughters-in-laws into this kingdom. And so we talk about the unleavened bread, and then after the unleavened bread, Messiah, being that bread from heaven, rises. And he told, I believe it was Mary, he said, "Don't touch me yet, because I have not gone to the Father yet." And so that bread rises, and it's ready to be offered as the wave offering. And so during these different events and during these different seasons, we see parallels within the Scriptures of the Son, the bridegroom, coming out of each chamber, going into each one of these Mazarot signs. And so after he has offered himself up and the Father has accepted the offering, there's the vows. So there's the commitment vows. And so correlating this to the Hebrew wedding, we see this is the time when the bride and the groom say, "I do. We agree to the terms of the covenant." And so after that, the Messiah says, "I go on to prepare a place for you." So we understand this from Hebrew culture and from the Scriptures, that the husband goes off and he's preparing a place within the kingdom of Yahuwah, within the Father. And so fast forwarding into the second, fulfilling the second return, he's not coming back as the suffering servant, the lowly and humble who gave himself, but he's coming back as the king. And so that's when we have the Day of Trumpets, the Yom Teruah, that when the king returns, it's the announcing the coming of the king. And then after that comes the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And that's the at-one-ment, when husband and wife come together, they solidify their marriage vows, and then they consummate. And then moving on into Sukkot, that's the wedding banquet. When everybody's together at the last banquet, the bride and groom have come together, and we're all rejoicing for that marriage, and they go off together to live forever. They tabernacle together. And so that's kind of the story that runs through the overall, story that is traced throughout the heavens. And so these Moedim, this seasons, these signs are pointing us to the Messiah, are pointing us to the bridegroom. And he says that he is the light of the world. So this is the day spring that shall rise. And Abraham, or the Messiah said that Abraham saw his day and that he was glad. And so that's the day that when Abraham looked up, he said, I can see my seed, right? I can see the Messiah. So just as the Messiah looked back and realized that, hey, so Abraham, for example, in the gospel records, the Messiah said, before Abraham was, I am. Well, I am what? I am he. He's saying he saw my day and was glad. So Abraham looked up into the heavens and said that this is him. This is the seed. This is his day. He was glad for to have that promise of the coming salvation. And so this story that's written in the heavens, that's written in this heavenly scroll, taking us all the way through each one of the feasts. You have the spring feast and then the fall feast. So starting off in Virgo, where the virgin, or Betula, the young maiden, she gives birth to the virgin, the glorious branch, and starting into the spring feast. And then we move into Libra. It's the scales of justice. It demands a price from the seed. A cross has to be born. Price is paid. So the son offers himself as part of the dowry for the bride, as part of the engagement to the father. And then we have Scorpio. So this is where the seed battles with the serpent. And then moving into Sagittarius, the serpent king defeats the serpent, casts down the dragon. And then Capricorn, the seed must die, eternal life springs from his death. And then moving into Aquarius, the seed pours out living water, the bride is given earns guarantee to live again. And this is the Shavuot weeks. And so I'm providing this information. This is actually from Rav Shaul. If you check out his book, and The Creation Cries Out, he has a whole 15 different books that goes through this for those who want to go further into detail in this. But we go through the spring feast and now entering into the fall feast. Moving on into the fall feast. So this is the second return, the conquering king. And so we're in that age of the Pisces. And so this is, we've discussed this before. Is this Judah and Israel being tied together, coming back together after Aquarius has poured out the outpouring of the Spirit, the resurrection, and moving from Aquarius into Pisces, which the seed reuniting both houses, the remnant, moving into Aries, going in the reverse direction. This is Aries, the Lamb of God is found worthy. He's the one that's able to open the scrolls. And then going in reverse direction, moving on to Taurus. Taurus is the conquering king. He comes to execute judgment. And so this Aries, the Lamb, the announcement, everyone's up in heaven shouting and screaming, holy, 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 and this is blowing of the trumpets. And then we're moving on into Taurus, into the days of awe. The conquering king comes to execute the judgment. Then finalize coming into from Taurus into Gemini. You have Gemini, the two witnesses, right? The prince, he comes from the great glory, the marriage, the husband and wife. Different parallels, different ways to see these figures and stuff, but it could be also symbolic of Judah and Israel coming back finally together, or the body and the bride being united. These different components within Gemini. So this is the Day of Atonement, the at-one-ment, the coming together. And then Cancer, the remnant bride united, brought safely into the kingdom. And this is the Sukkot, coming into the house, into the Sukkah. And then finalizing into the kingdom reign, into Leo, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, rules as a king. So working in the reverse direction from Virgo, giving birth to Libra, the price is being paid, to the battle with the scorpion, to the Sagittarius, to the serpent king, defeating the serpent, casting the dragon down. Capricorn, the seed must die, eternal life springs from life after his death. Aquarius, the seed pours out the living water, the bride given earns guarantee to live again. Pisces, the seed reunites both houses, to the remnant bride is revealed. Aries, the Lamb of Yah is found worthy during Yom Teruah, the trumpets. And then Taurus, during the days of awe, the conquering king comes to execute judgment. And Gemini, the two witnesses, the prince comes in great glory, the marriage of the Lamb Supper, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and then Sukkot, Cancer, remnant bride reunited, the boat brought safely into the kingdom. And then Leo, Lion, tribe of Judah, rules as king in his kingdom reign. So that's kind of a short overview of coursing through the heavens in the Mazzaroth. And this was talked about, we think of this like in different cultures, and even Shaul talks about in Romans. Romans 10:12, I'll read these verses real quick. He says, "For there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek, for the same Adon over all is rich unto all who call upon him. For whoever shall call upon the name of Yahuwah shall be saved." So faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Yah. And so Abraham, he is the father of faith, as it said. So he was the one that first had the faith in the stars, in the gospel, in the message of this coming Redeemer who would come and redeem not just Israel, not just Judah, but the entire world, the entire race of humanity. This story was written for all of mankind, and now those who believe are a part of that household. It's up to each individual person to become a part of that, but it's for the invitation goes out to everyone, but not everyone will accept. And it says in verse 18, "But I say to you, have they not heard? Yes, verily, their sound went out into all the earth, and their words unto the ends of the world. But I say, did Israel not know? First Moses saith, I will provoke you to jealousy by them or no people, and by a foolish nation I will anger you." So the words of the stars, the words of the Mazzaroth goes out. Everyone is without excuse that there is a creator, that there is somebody who put all this together to make these ordinances, this design. And so the entire earth can look up and see this. And we mentioned last week was Enoch. And in the book of Enoch, it says that in chapter 6, Azazel corrupted the secrets in heaven. And so the following cultures from out the world followed this corruption. They followed the twisting of the Mazzaroth and to the sun worship, because the sun is like, it's without the sun, we're dead, essentially, right? We have no source of life, no source of power. And so ancient cultures, and even cultures still today, we still have our science prophets that put the sun at the middle, and they worship. Even I was reading earlier today, Copernicus talks about the all-seeing eye, and the sun is a great place for the temple. And this is their worship, to put this figure in the middle and say, this is our God, this is who we're going to worship. And so we might not focus so much on the stars and astrology, but I assure you they are, and they know things that we don't even think about or consider. Right? In the heavens. So they probably have a better understanding than most believers do, which is a shame, because Yahuwah created it for us, right? It's our creation. He made the kingdom. It says that we're written before time for us to have this, just as it was predestined for the Messiah. Same with us. We are who he is in the word. And so it's good that we're looking into these things and studying this stuff.
If I could clarify one thing, if I heard you correctly, you talked about Aries being the beginning of the circuit because it was the constellation in the spring, but then we just jumped over to Betula, Virgo, the Virgin. And the reason is because in the daylight hours, though Aries will be the constellation on the horizon in the morning, and that's really where the sun is, you can't see it because it's daylight. Right. And the thing that you'll see at nighttime, which is the opposite because it spins around once each day, what you'll see at night is Virgo, which is the opposite, even though technically we might think, well, Virgo's 6 months later, 6 hours or 12 hours later, that's the reference of the opposite, right? Because that's when you see at night versus when you see in the day, even though the sun is in the house during the day, that's part of the mystery of the study of how the sun runs through the course. That's what Greg was saying. I wanted to mention one other thing. What Bullinger said was, in Egypt, out in front of the Great Pyramid, or one of the pyramids, you have what they call the Sphinx. We mentioned this a couple weeks ago. Right now, it has the carved head of a pharaoh in the, as it were, hunched down back end body of a lion. But it looks odd, like it doesn't seem to fit. Well, it's believed that the head had been a woman, which would have played into the Betula character. And then pharaohs typically would deface or efface or change the look of previous sculptures to be a regard of themselves, present tense, rather than historically previous pharaohs. And so it's believed that the Sphinx had been built to say, if the head was the woman and the tail end was the lion, then that's you might say, like a circle has no beginning and end, but that would be the place to regard the beginning and the end of the circuit, starting the head with the woman and ending up the tail end with the lion, which would be in Hebrew Betula, the Virgo, and ending up with Ari, or the lion, which would be Leo. So even though it's technically starting with Aries, practically what you can see at night is starting with Betula. But it's still being a circle, that's where we're trying to say, like I mentioned the other week, reading a circle word. So Greg, do you think that, let's say Enoch or Seth or Adam or somebody had determined these images? You mentioned how this was clearly evident to everybody. However, I can look up there, and like I said before, I can notice the Big Dipper, which wasn't even really what it was called. And I can notice, the North Star, everything spins around it. And I can notice the big W shape, which they say is Cassiopeia. That's one of the Deacon constellations. That's not even a primary constellation, but I can't see all these constellations. So do you have any idea? Have you studied historically to say, what is it that's retained these images such that that verse in Psalms 19 would be true, that all people could just look up and, oh, there it is, clearly hear the voice which isn't spoken?
Well, I think it comes from the understanding of even pre scriptural days, it's pervasive throughout all these religions and different cultures. And so there's an underlying theme that goes throughout. So whether it was when Yah named every star, it says that he named all the stars, was it during that? Did he pass that on to Enoch? I mean, there is semblance of that within Enoch from what we understand. When you read that book, like that's the first heavenly tablet scroll that was given to man. I can imagine or assume that Adam knew some of this stuff. After we see it as far back as Genesis 3:15, talking about the seed crushing the head. So did they knew that? And that's what I did they know that? That's what I mentioned when Eve was like, I've gotten the man from Yahuwah. So she thought she had the Messiah that was coming to redeem. Was she actually saying that? And so all the way back to Adam and Eve, did they know these stories? But I think from seeing that a lot of this is pervasive in all these cultures, even some that predate, the scriptures that we have, from what we understand anyway. I think the story's been from the beginning. It's from the creation that this has been there, and I would imagine that it was taught to Adam, who taught it to Seth, who taught it to Enoch.
Well, I would have to say that in my life, the great benefit of living in the tail end of the 20th century and here the 21st century, I never had any regard of the story in the stars. If anything, as we said, it was like, oh, don't even deal with that. Pretend it's not there. I would guess, based on what you're saying, that other cultures were very aware of what those pictures were, and they told at least the story as we might look at a book with chapter headings. Imagine if you had a book and every chapter had an illustrated page. So the first illustrated page was this ram, but not a powerful ram, a humbled ram. And then again, whether you go in one direction or the other, the direction I went last week was the next picture was a powerful bull. Okay. And then you get this image of two faces, whether it's twins or a man and a woman or a brother and sister, or two dispositions, the smiley face, the frowny face, like the theatrical mask. But if you could picture a book where the illustration page of each chapter was each successive image, what you're saying is that historically, every people group basically has passed on this story until it got to us, where I never had the story passed on. And so now I have to look at these strange symbols and say, that's somehow a story about the Messiah of Israel being betrothed to his 12 tribes of Israel.
Well, you mentioned the bull. So, I mean, that's, from what I've read and understood, it's coming out of Gemini into Taurus as that first age, the age of chaos. And so we can see this prevalent in like Egypt. You've got, what's the bull? The Apis, the black bull of Egypt. And then India, you've got Nandi. And then Zeus, you've got the bull of Europa. And if we read in the book of Enoch, it talks about the parable with the different bulls and stuff. And so this is that particular age. And I think if you do a little bit of research on Mithras, there's a illustration of him slaying the bull. And so we see this bull even in the United States, Wall Street, you see a bull and a bear, so where these things are passed down in our cultures, in our throughout the world. So it's not just, not just in the Bible, but like I said, it's pervasive throughout all cultures. Most cultures anyway.
Does anyone else have a question you want to talk to Greg about regarding this?
Greg, have you put any correlation to this with, I guess, the rotation of an astrological age being 2,160 years, basically? And, they're saying that we're in the age of, I guess we're in the age of Aquarius, or we're in the age of Pisces, depending upon who you talk to.
Yeah, I mean, that's where what it's understood is that each one of these ages is roughly 2,160 years, 2,000 for simplicity's sake. And so going from starting off, ending at Gemini into Taurus, into Aries, and now we're in that period of Pisces. And even remember that song that was back, in the 70s? This is dawning of the age of Aquarius. And so somebody knows that, or they have that understanding. They think that we are in that transitional period in between Pisces and the age of Aquarius. And so the reason for that is, the Pisces, when the Messiah came, Abraham was kind of like the first sign of the Son of Man that we see. If you read, I think it's in Jasher, or it might be in Jubilees, but it talks about when Abraham was born, there were signs of the heavens, and a particular object swallowed up another one. And so they all gathered around, and this is like in Nimrod's kingdom during the birth of Abraham. And so this was the first sign of the Son of Man. And so when Abraham was born, that was the first epoch, the first age of time. And so the Messiah would be the second one. And so we saw that sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And so this is when it was understood people believe between 12 BC and 3 BC, sometime around there, that the sign of the Son of Man was seen in the heavens. And this is when Jupiter was in Virgo, hovering in there for 9 months, just in her gestation period. So the sun was under her feet or on her head, moon was under her feet, and Jupiter was in her womb essentially for 9 months before it passed out. And so this just recently happened again in 2017, September 23rd. It's believed that is once again the sign of the Son of Man coming. And so there's that period back when Messiah was born. It talks about the Magi, right, coming from Babylon, essentially from the east. And so Daniel was out in Babylon, and he was made chief of the astrologers, chief over all of those people. And so it's likely that he would have either taught them this, or they knew about it. Even Balaam, he knew about. He said, "A star shall rise out of Jacob, out of Israel." And so, this is known in a lot of different cultures and understandings. And so even people who aren't Jews or Israel had some of this coming of the star man, the understanding of who this was. And so, yes, to your point, is this age that we are supposedly passing into, moving into what we believe to be Aquarius, the outpouring is, the resurrection, the king's returning, and we'll begin this new period during the age of Aquarius.
So
I have a couple of questions. You mentioned before someone's book. It sounded like Ross Shaul.
Rob Shaul, yep.
Rob Shaul. Okay.
Creation cries out, yep.
Thank you.
So let me ask you, Greg, I've heard that Jews, rabbinical Judaism today, has been talking about in some way that they're expecting the imminent appearing of a Messiah or the Messiah. Do you know what that is about, or why they would say that? You just mentioned as of September of 2021, just a couple months ago, there was this same sign
2017.
of 2017.
September 23rd, 2017, yes.
Okay, I thought that I had heard something about this year also. There was another event that was similar in Betula, and that ties into something that's in the book of Revelation, that the sun was over her shoulder. But do you know anything about that expectation that the Jews presently are anticipating a Messiah to appear based on what they see in what prophecies, or is it in the constellations? Do you know?
No, I'm not aware of what the Jews think. Nope.
I've heard it from a couple different sources in a couple different ways. Just, so the question is, what does somebody else of another culture think and why? I don't know specifically. Things I heard are not necessarily true, but it sounds like it could easily have something to do with the constellations. And just so people know, these constellations that we're looking at are the primary. Each constellation has 3 other constellations hovering around them called deacon constellations, which also mean something and can be interpreted. Bullinger and Rawlinson, and these other books that Kurt had put up last week by Seiss, for example, describes, there's 4 books, as it were, 4 chapters, and then or 3 chapters within each of the 4 books. And each one is a retelling of the same story. And because they're from a Christian perspective, they're saying it's Jesus Christ combating against the satanic adversary for the sake of winning the release of the church or his people. In which case, then we discussed, well, is that Israel or is that the church? And what does that mean? We could elaborate the story. But what I'm saying is that if you are telling us that every people from the beginning could look up and they have these 12 pictures, I would think that they would interpret them in some way to fit their culture. So that's why you could look up and say, well, these are Greek, these are Roman, these are Chinese, these are from Persia or Egyptian. They're going to look up and see the same sequence of 12 pictures, but spin it a different story. So how is anybody to know what the reality is?
Well, I say that anybody can look up and see that there's a creator, not necessarily that they would look up and put together this story. Story has been passed down orally and through traditions, and temples have been built, and religions started over it. But like I said, the story about an Enoch and Azazel twisting the secrets of heaven and these understanding and these different things. But it talks about, like I mentioned in Romans, the words have gone out to the ends of the world. Their sound went out into all the earth. And so what's he talking about? Is he just talking about, oh, well, yeah, just everyone can see stars? Or does everyone know that there's a story behind it and it's been corrupted? But I think that's, we now have the written word. Like a lot of times we don't think about it, but I think, a lot of people didn't have scriptures. They couldn't just go pick up a Bible, and they couldn't turn on the internet and do a search and try to figure this out and figure that out. And so these things were passed down through the art of storytelling. And so it's a big giant game of telephone. When you start off with one message, by the time it courses its way through different cultures and nations and stuff, it can get twisted, can get turned around. But for anybody to deny that there is a creator, it's just foolishness.
Well, my answer to the question is that we have a parallel story in the alphabet, the 22 letters, and another parallel, you might say, a third track, which is the Mishkan pattern. So my take on this whole matter, like especially that verse that we read there in Haggai, that the Semitic insignet stamp, engraved epigraph, the 22 letters in this circle, like a signet ring of Yahuwah Elohim Zavot. The message that's carried in the letters is the gospel message found Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John regarding Yeshua. That I believe is the Ayin Dalet. And the Ayin Tav, okay, now I'm heralding or mentioning Daniel 12:4. So the archangel Gabriel told Daniel, hide the words and seal the book until the time of the end. But the word end, spelled Kuf Zadi, can also mean awakening. As I was looking in the dictionary at a certain word, and this is one of the benefits of using the dictionary rather than a computer, is that you're looking at one word, and as you're hunting, your eye is seeing all these other words around as you're trying to localize the one you're looking for. There was this word spelled Aleph Tav Ayin Resh Vav Tav Aleph, a Torota. It means awaken or inspiration. Well, Aleph is a prefix, Tav is a prefix, but Tav Ayin Resh, it would be the root word, Vav Tav would be the plural suffix, Aleph, this Aramaic suffix, but Ayin Resh is the key word. Well, that's the Ayin Resh Kaf, as in Eric, as in Erictology, as in Ayin Yod Resh, which is the word for city, literally means to wake up or incite to activity, be vigilant, looking for an enemy or making sure everything's what it's supposed to be. If you hear a dog barking outside in the middle of the night and it wakes you up, it's like, listen, is he barking because he's hearing a coyote, or is he barking because somebody's trying to break into your vehicle, or something's, a storm's coming, or there was an earthquake, or, wake up and have to analyze what is going on. Well, so this concept of the word Erictology, Ayin Resh Kaf, Eric, literally wake up and assess the value to be, well, it's the word prepare and compare. As the bride prepared, as one of the bridesmaids prepared to end because she had oil. And the word oil, shin mem nun, literally means assess the value. So it's kind of like hidden within the language. We're repeatedly told it's wake up time. Pay attention, assess, think, compare the stories of what you've heard, look what's going on around you, figure out what's going on, and get yourself ready.
He says that in Matthew 25, the bridegroom was a long time coming, but the people have been asleep.
And it wasn't their fault they fell asleep. The bridegroom took a long time, but it's time to wake up. You hear the shofar. So we have read various verses where it says, sound a shofar, wake my people up. And the ayin dalet, ayin tav, I believe, is a key to the code. If the code is the Mishkan pattern, the key to the code is ayin dalet, ayin tav. Ayin dalet is the word that means until, but it's a witness and a testimony. Ayin dalet, a testifier. Ayin means weigh, balance, compare, assess, look at it, determine. The word ayin, spelled ayin yod nun, is synonymous with the word for ear, which is aleph zayin nun. Synonymous also with oil and ayin resh kaf, which is to say, ayin or aleph zayin nun is also an equipment belt, or like a policeman or a military or a contractor has a belt with tools and gear on it, just like it's a belt of the zodiac of the Mazarot. And the weightier matters are in the spring and the fall, like having 2 bags of nails and screws and whatever you're building with as a contractor. A belt of the circuit of the Moedim. So to ayin dalet and ayin tav is to comprehend the door. What door? We've gone through this before. I'll say it again. Moshe said, I put before you life and death, blessing and cursing. I urge you to choose life, but you have a choice to make. That's a dalet. Yeshua said, I am the door, a dalet. But dalet lamed lamed, or dalet lamed tav is the way it's spelled, also means to be impoverished, to be lowered down, to hang down loosely, weakened. He came from the heavens to the earth in a weakened format, put to the weapon, subject unto death as a human. So when you were talking about the suffering servant, we'd call that the Ben Yosef, or the son of Joseph, or modeled after the pattern of Joseph, who himself was destined for this preeminent vizier office of Egypt, but yet all his brothers despised him, thought he was an arrogant jerk, tried to kill him, sold him as a slave. He was sent into prison. He was framed. Potiphar's wife accused, falsely thrown into the dungeon, forgotten. Oh, then he was put into a preeminent status. But that story of that suffering servant of Ben Yosef is, as you say, captured in the spring feast, and then in the fall feast, there's the Ben David, or the pattern, the model of David. Well, but David at first was also a shepherd who was despised by his brothers. He did kill Goliath. He then was given the daughter of Saul, the king, to marry, and then he was a persona non grata. He was on the run. There was a bounty on his head, and Saul spent a few years trying to chase him down and kill him until he was finally made the king, but he even had a rebellion with Absalom. What I'm saying is that even though we say, oh yeah, the patterned after Joseph, patterned after David, the great king, the suffering servant, there's more to the story than just those things. But the idea that there's these 2 witnesses, 2 testimonies. What is the door? If Yeshua is the door that we're supposed to ayin that dalet, what has that got to do with this story? Well, it's the story in the Aleph Bet, and it's the story held, contained within these Mazarot. Well, then what's Ayin Tav? Ayin Tav is translated simply time. Ayin Tav Hey means right now, this time. That's the first word we opened up with the earlier hour from the book of Haggai. But a Tav is a mark or a sign or a symbol. Each one of these Mazarot symbols are a Tav. They're a mark, they're a sign. Each letter of the alphabet is a Tav. A musical note is a Tav. This symbol of the menorah shape is a Tav. Any etching or scribble or graphic means something, a drawing, a shape. I can look behind you and say, well, there's the 12 constellations, but it almost looks like it's in a wagon wheel motif. The wagon wheel means something. It's a Tav. So the Ayin the Tav means comprehend the meaning of the symbol. To comprehend the meaning of the symbol of the alphabet, to comprehend the meaning of the symbol of the Mazarot constellation is Ayining Tav. And then for Gabriel to say that Daniel hide the words and seal the book until the time, that's Ayin Dalet, but there's a hyphen with the word Ayin Tav. So it's actually a 4-letter word, but it's joined by this hyphen. And whether that was in the original writing or whether that was added later, I couldn't tell you. We would write in English until the time. Well, there is no letter. The letter Hey means the, but there's no letter Hey. It just says until, then it's hyphened time. Well, in Hebrew, the word spelled Ayin Lamed is a yoke. Aleph Tav is also a yoke, a connector, yoked with, in conjunction with. So I'm taking, and this I've said this ever since back in 2004, I'm taking the command of Daniel, hide the words and seal the book, Ayin Dalet hyphen Ayin Tav, is to say, see them both together. Understand the door, the decision we have to choose life or death. Every person born to the face of the earth must determine for themselves life or death, blessing or cursing. You're free to choose death and curse, but that's your choice. And for Yeshua to say, I am the door, nobody enters the house of my Father except through me. Okay, was he telling the truth or not? And if we say, I'm going to believe he's telling you the truth, how do I do that? He was a man who lived and died 2,000 years ago. Oh, he came back to life. I saw in Portland just the other day this big billboard, Jesus is alive. What does that even mean? Maybe he is, maybe he's not. They're communicating to the general masses. What is somebody supposed to do with that information? But if I say, oh, he's the Word made flesh. Well, that means then what word? The alphabet letter word? That word made flesh. That word is still alive. That was the phonetic expression of the alphabet in the 22 letters there.
Well, I think it can also be understood as, he is the high priest, right? And so he goes into the temple once a year. The high priest was to go into the temple, into the Holy of Holies. And so he opened that path for us. He said that these things have been revealed unto babes. A lot of this stuff that we are talking about, Judah didn't understand. The Jews don't understand. A lot of these cultures around the world don't understand. They didn't have the right heart to the Father to understand these things. And these things have been revealed to us. And those who are the powers that be don't have these understanding about that Dalet, the door, and getting through. And it says in Corinthians that whenever the Torah is read, there's still a veil over their eyes whenever the Torah is read, and without the Messiah getting us through that doorway, getting us in, that veil being torn, and that's symbolic as well in the wedding ceremony at the Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. Husband and wife come together, they consummate their marriage. The tearing of the veil, the blood pouring out, the coming into the family, it's symbolic there. So we see that he is the high priest. He is the way into the holies of holies, just like the high priest in the days of the temple period. would take the sins of the people. He was the head of the people, and he would take upon the functionality of being that high priest, entering into that holies of holies. And so our Messiah, he has done that spiritually, from a spiritual aspect, and bringing us back into alignment with the Father, into this heavenly temple. And so this menorah, or not the menorah, but the sod around us, the Mazaroth, is the heavenly temple. And so this is also an illustration of that temple. And so how do we get into the inner circle? Is through the Messiah, through that doorway, through that door that gives us access to the Father. And he said, I came so that you can have access to the Father. And so that's how we get in to this inner circle.
So I would then take what you're saying with what I was saying and say this Ayin Dalet hyphen to Ayin Tav is like a binocular, two eyes seeing the same thing, giving it a three-dimensional perspective, meaning understand that each symbol, whether it's the alphabet letter or whether it's the mazar, the mazarot means is the plural of mazar, whether it's the constellation, it is retained in the gospel narrative of Yeshua being Mashiach. And again, Mashiach, mem shin yod chet, can mean the conversation. Shin yod chet is conversation or communication made touchable, graspable, tangible, which would be the mem shin. So for me to say each one of these 12 pictures and their three deacons is a communication. And so for Yeshua to be that communication anthropomorphized in human form, walking the face of the earth, that we could grab a hold of him, touch him, feel him. Okay, Ayin Tav, comprehend the meanings of the symbols, the letters, the pictures. So to study this is not a bad thing to do. It's the right thing to do, according to my interpretation of Daniel 12:4. Hide the words into the book until the time of the waking up. Well, what that means is until the time is binocular, you see both. The meaning of the letters is yoked with comprehending who Yeshua is. He's the guy who fulfills these 12 symbols. He's the guy whose story gives meaning to the 22 letters of the alphabet. So the 22 letters and the 12 symbols are referring to him, and he's the guy that gives the accurate meaning of these symbols. If you're in another culture who knows these symbols but was given a different story what they mean, or you have the Semitic alphabet, or even then the Greek and the Latin and the English change, take away letters, add letters, you know you have letters, but they don't mean anything. He's the guy that gives meaning to those letters. And he's the only guy, which is the door to my Father's house. And you could almost see, there's some houses that are laid out like this, like the center courtyard, a garden area in the middle, and then these rooms out around it, like the 12 pictures around your head there. From what I understand in ancient Israel, that was the way a town was set up. You'd have a center where there'd be a community fire, which would be a commercial fire for people baking or whatever you needed fire for. Then around that were the houses, and then around the houses were the fields. And there was a Sabbath day commandment that says, don't kindle a fire in any of your dwellings. And it's like, gosh, what if it was freezing cold out, middle of winter, or whether you needed to, have a pot of tea, should you not allowed to make a fire? And there was a group, place called Bet Emet here in Vancouver, Washington, years ago that did a whole study about that. And what they determined was, when he said, don't kindle a fire in any of your dwellings, he wasn't necessarily referring to toasting bread or making a pot of tea. He was saying, don't light up the commercial fire in the middle of your community. Like right where your forehead would be in the middle of that circle. That's what they said. Now, see, that's a cultural design that I don't know anything about. So if I read the words, it's like, well, gee, don't even light a fire to keep warm. I had heard in the Middle Ages when they were hunting down Jews to try to inquisition them, it's like, boy, those guys are real sneaky. They hide there's no way to really find them. And the guy says, no, it's easy to find a Jew. Go up to the hill above the village in the middle of the winter on the Saturday and notice who doesn't have a fire burning. That's a Jew. Go get them. Why? Because they think they're not allowed to have any fire to keep warm on Saturday, on their Sabbath day. It's like, is that true? Was he really talking about the community commercial fire, or was he talking about any fire to keep you warm, or turning on a light bulb, or riding in an elevator? And so they, the Jews, have interpreted these things according to the rabbinical tradition or the Talmud writings. And I'm not trying to disparage any of that. I'm saying they've tried to figure things out. So what I'm saying is that to give explanation to anything he said is a metaphor of entering my Father's house.
Well, to your point in Jeremiah, it says that when he brought them out of the land of Egypt, that the fathers would pick up sticks and then they would burn things to the Queen of Heaven. And so I see that as, hey, they're gathering sticks so that they can do these offerings and sacrifices. And so when they're coming out of Egypt, they were still partaking in a lot of these practices. And so the Queen of Heaven, the Ishtar, is pervasive within those cultures back then. And you mentioned like Daniel, it talks about that which makes desolate. I think it's called the abomination of desolation. But when you read that in the Hebrew, it talks about the Baal Shemim, which is like a Hebrew pun for Baal Shamayim. And so it's the Lord of heaven. And so this image that Israel took upon, this Baal that they were worshiping within their temples, is the God-man, is the man in the middle, the sun that they would worship, the planets and the sun and the surrounding things. And so that was pervasive in their cultures, and Israel had incorporated that into their worship.
Well, as all these matters, we're here at the end of the hour here. The Ayin Dalet Ayin Tav, there's two ayins. We got to look at these things. We got to ponder these things. We got to listen to what Yeshua said and take what he said. A husband, you may find another deeper meaning than I couldn't read the whole thing. Anyway, we could discuss this after we stop recording here. We're right at the edge of the 2 hours. What I'm saying is that the benefit of Yeshua is that he said, I only came to do what I see my Father doing and say what I hear my Father saying. He came to give us both the word, interesting thing about the alphabet letters, both the word Aleph and the Bet. Both the letters are synonyms, meaning taught, trained, domesticated, and of the house. Of my Father's house. Let me tell you what he said, what he does, and what it all means. That's Yeshua came to reveal that to us, and it's also in each one of the letters and each one of the pictures. That's ayining the Tav. And to use these two yoked together gives us the key in the lock to opening up what it's all about. If you don't have Yeshua and you don't have the Torah synchronized like a key teeth in the tumblers to open the lock, the whole thing will remain a mystery or hidden in other cultures, which I have to believe, based on what Yeshua said, based on what the Torah said, just aren't true. And even though you can make a sensible story, it'll be like a story of the Three Little Pigs or Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, or you can make up any story. Doesn't mean that it's true. But we, going back to Haggai, right now, be strong, Nam Yahweh. Be strong. The salvation of Yah is connected, yoked, Bet Nun, to the righteousness of Yah, which is those who walk in his ways of Mishpat and Zadokah, which is justice and righteousness, and Emet and Chesed, which is truth and kindness, are pointing at the great and glorious strength that all peoples of the earth, Nam Yahweh, will see manifest if they do it. I'm just quoting Haggai 2:4 real quickly. I am your Aleph Tav. I am the guy that will make this happen. I, Yod He Vav He, cause it to exist when you walk in my ways. So this wheel, this great secret combination lock that nobody knows what to do with, can only be answered as a function of the Aleph Tav of Yahweh Zavot. What do you got to say, Kurt?
It's time. It's time. I just wanted to encourage people every Thursday night at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. We get together and we pray. We're praying for the Father to wake up Israel, and we're going to keep doing it until he finishes this task. You know, this everything's got to run its course. It's going to do what he wants it to do when it's time. But I don't think it's unreasonable to ask and ask often, because I don't know how many he needs of us awake to start fighting for us, but it's just time to get really serious about asking him to start doing this. And the more voices we can add to this prayer, the better off we'll all be. You know?
Well, that word, Ayin Shin Vav, compel it to happen, produce. Because I'm your Aleph Tav, Nam Yahweh Zavot. He said so. You know, for us to grab his words and bring them back to him and say, I'm interpellating, I'm interrupting to remind you that you said when we do this, you will answer, respond, and you'll save us from our enemies and from the malintent of what some very powerful forces have underway at this very moment.
Now, we read in the I read in the Minor Prophets, you know, we had to come back and we had to admit that our ancestors were wrong and they made a mistake. You know, and there were 6-7 people on the call last week, and that's exactly what every one of us did. And I don't know, you know, if you've never prayed with brothers and sisters who call themselves Israel, come join us. Come join us. Put our voices together. Let's cry out to Yahuwah. The other thing is, next week we are going to get into Mystery Babylon. So that should take up a couple of weeks to get through that. But I'm really excited to take on that topic.
Okay, let me ask you this one thing, Kurt. You had wanted us to discuss this Mazarot a few months ago, actually. Is there any bit of it left unaddressed that you want to see addressed before we go on to another subject matter?
I don't think so. I'd have to digest this whole thing, but I thank Greg for joining us and making his words join yours, and I think it's great. You know, I'd never heard anything about the Mazarot till you brought it up the first time. I didn't even, you know, it wasn't even a thing. It wasn't even on the radar, you know, but we brought it up like a year ago, and it just seemed like something we'd have to finish. And so I think we've attacked it enough, other than having like your friend Carrie, who seems to have done a lot of research on it, you know, join us on another call down the road. That would be hear his side.
We've barely even scratched the surface of this, though. I mean, I will say that this goes a lot deeper. We haven't even discussed the names of the stars and the deacons, and so just for anybody who is hungry and thirsting for that stuff, we just barely touched on it. And so this is a huge topic with a lot more to get involved with. So these things out. They're going to continue to search for these things and get to know the Father's heart, the Father's will, whether it's written down in a book or up in the sky. Either way, both the book and the heavens have been twisted and corrupted, and it takes time. It takes a student of the word. It takes a meek and humble heart to want to know these things. And it says that if the princes of this world had known the things that we know today, they would never have crucified him.
Well, I guess we could close out in prayer if somebody would like to.
Well, let me say one more thing. If other people would like to have further discussion about this Mazarot, we can address this again in the future, a couple more weeks from now or whatever that looks like. Leave comments.
I think it'd be great to get into the Mystery Babylon with Christmas staring us in the face, you know, and people, some people may still be on the fence with it. So.
Okay, but I'm just saying, if people really want to address this matter some more, we can do that.
Sure.
just let us know, because we're trying to take some of what people have to offer, or what people want to request in terms of what the subject matter is that we're doing on these various Skype calls.
Well, my question is that have either of you, Eric or Greg, when you had mentioned it about the Mazzaroth, the constellations with the Moedim, and more into that and how it lines up, and because I got a little confused with heliocentric versus geocentric and how the sun runs its course. And do you look at the constellations? You can't see them during the day, but you look at them at night, but it's the opposite. So I think I have more questions right now than answers.
Well, that's a good point, Mary. And then also when Eric had brought this subject matter up originally, he talked about Moshe being up on that hill and seeing the 12 tribes with their banners, and the constellations actually representing the tribes. And we've never really pinned the tribes to the constellation. So that would be something worth doing. Like, it would be, like, if we did the whole Mystery Babylon, we can tie that in, because you were talking about the 12 stones on the breastplates, the 12 constellations, the 12 tribes.
Right.
It all kind of works together.
Well,
I'm also
again in a couple
interested.
weeks. Sure. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I would also be interested in the deacons that you mentioned, because, you know, I've been looking into the Mazzaroth, and I found a lot of different input on that, and you know, some of it is just way out there, but I had not heard anything about the extras, and so I'd love to hear a teaching on that.
About the what?
The deacons.
The deacons that you mentioned that are affiliated with the 12 different houses.
Okay, just so you know, Bollinger and Rolliston both cover that subject matter.
I've ordered Bollinger's book. I have not received that yet.
Okay, well, but again, they look at it from a very, I just use as a description. It's not a diminishment, but from a Christian perspective, meaning they don't talk about the Torah, they don't talk about Israel, they don't talk about the Moedim. They just say, here's Jesus fighting with the devil, born of the Virgin, crucified, rising from the dead for the sake of redeeming the church. That's the very specific orientation. That's the center hub wheel upon which everything else is referenced, which is okay, but I'm just saying you're not going to get from them a different angle. So
right, exactly.
Greg tied it to the Moedim. You're not going to get that from them.
Yeah, like
Right.
that book I was referencing, I could give you a link to that. You can buy that on Amazon. It's a whole series, actually. It's way, way more in depth than what we could cover in 30 minutes. But it's from a Torah keeping position from the Moedim, correlating it with the Mazzaroth.
Great, thank you. I would appreciate that.
But yeah, it supersedes Bollinger or Ralston any day, hands down.
But Greg, you also had, I think you might have made that available to people, that little drawing or sketch or whatever you want to call it, where you show the constellations and bracketed to the different festivals that I looked at that you sent me on my phone.
Yeah, that's in that book.
Okay, so you can make that available to people also, maybe, or take that image and put it up on the chat so they can see what you're referring to.
We can
Yeah.
do both.
Okay, that might be helpful.
You know, it's so I guess the task will be over the next few weeks when we do Mystery Babylon to tie all this stuff together. It's not going to be just like two-hour sessions. It's going to go a lot further. So
Yeah, there you go.
which is fun, you know, themes.
Well, these are particular for these days. The people that live in, what is it, Missouri, Kentucky, part of Tennessee that got whacked by that tornado, they went to bed Friday night just like any other night. There was a photograph somebody put up today showing it's just a nice little residential neighborhood in the middle of the country, and it's absolutely sheen mem mem, absolutely annihilated, destroyed. 10 billion chunks of pieces strewn, and their lives are absolutely destroyed in terms of their possessions and sanity and making any sense of anything. And yet there's a couple houses here and there which look almost unscathed, almost untouched. It's like we have to expect that at any moment our nice little sane world could be just torn asunder because of an international event, a geological event. A couple days ago, they said there was 18 5-point earthquakes off the coast of Oregon in one evening, and then the next day there was a 13 more. About 30 5.5-point earthquakes just offshore. I didn't feel them, but the point is, any one of those could send a tsunami, ravage the coast of the Northwest here.
But don't be afraid, because Yahuwah's got you.
I'm just saying, a tidal wave could come up the Columbia River, down the Willamette, and just flood Portland. Years ago, they were prophesying one 500 feet tall was going to do that. It could wipe out Seattle. It could destroy San Francisco. Why would there be 35-point earthquakes in the span of a few hours? Scientists can generate those things. Somebody was saying scientists, let's call them, generated the tsunami that wiped out Japan, that caused the Fukushima event. Is that true or not? I don't know. But they mess around with stuff like that, and maybe it's an international act of war. I don't know. But what I'm saying is any one of us may not be able to be here next week. These matters are life and death, to seek and call upon the name of Yahuwah Elohim Zavot, the Kadosh of Israel. Orient your heart. Remember, the thief on the cross could never put his hands together to pray, could never walk out the ways, could never sit down on Shabbat, but he said to Yeshua, remember me.
Every Thursday night, 8:30. Every Thursday night, 8:30. That's what we're doing. So if you want to join your voice to ours, we'd love to have you.
I'm just saying, there's something about, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can do. I might be in a wheelchair. I might be losing my mind. I might have gotten some kind of a toxic injection. But we can still turn our heart and soul, as Deuteronomy 30 says, to Yahuwah, the Elohim of Israel, and call out to him. That's all we've got.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you. So if people want to look ahead for next week, we're going to start off the thing with Joel 2 and 3. If you want to dig into that, listen to it, read it. Pretty tight book, man. It's pretty. They should fear Yahuwah. Really, fear him. But Yahuwah, thank you again for my brothers and sisters who call themselves Israel. Let these teachings go forward. Let people really start showing up and start sharing these videos, and your will be done in everything. We trust you, we believe you, and we want to make it to the New Jerusalem as you promised. Yahweh's name, I pray, amen.